Chapter 20. The mechanical thrum was deafening now, almost as loud as helicopter rotors. The sound demanded Mike return to full consciousness. Mike tried to get his eyes to zero in on whatever was causing the head-splitting sound. His eyes weren't fully cooperating, but they were giving him glimpses. Mike struggled to process what he was seeing. His head was pounding because the visual snatches were coming at him like they were being hit with a strobe light. Mike saw a robotic arm suspended above his head, a bear mask peeled open, held by the arm, honed bits of metal inside the mask, like miniature but lethal knives in constant motion. Mike's brain brought his sight completely back online, and Mike put it all together. He was lying on his back, on a hard metal surface. A reclining chair, and he was looking at the inside of a robotic mask full of sharp, continually moving metal. The mask was coming toward his face. Mike yelped and tried to get up. That's when he realized that he was bound to the chair. Steel bands were clamped around his wrists. A heavy leather strap was cinched tight around his chest. The metal juggernaut started to descend toward Mike's face. He did the only thing he could do. He brought every muscle he had into play and sent them all into motion. He squirmed and twisted and wriggled. He kicked his legs and he jolted his body up and down and side to side. Mike knew, of course, that his efforts were going to fail. He wasn't strong enough to break. Above the relentless metal churning, Mike heard a crack, a distinctive pinging crack. He knew that sound. A bolt had given away. Mike felt his arm fall away from him as one of the chair's armrests detached. His gaze still on the plunging mask, Mike jerked on his arm without much hope. To Mike's astonishment, the metal clamp disengaged from Mike's wrist. He had an arm free, but that wasn't enough. The mask was closer now. It was moving slowly, but unalterably, lower and lower. Sharp metal, soft face. Not a good combination. Frantic, Mike clenched his fingers in search of something, anything, on the side of the chair that could help him get free. He ran his fingers over an expanse of metal, thrust them between sharp gaps, and then Mike's fingers stopped on something flat and round, some kind of control button. Mike strained to see his hand, and he saw a quarter-sized green light. He didn't hesitate. He pushed the green button and... Eureka! The other wristband uncoupled. The mask was now just inches from Mike's nose. It was so close that the burring of the rotating and constantly cycling metal was blowing his hair. Feverish, with a crucial need to move, Mike fumbled with a leather chest strap. Maybe because he got lucky, or maybe because necessity is the mother of getting the hell out of Dodge, Mike managed to click the strap apart and slide off the chair. His escape couldn't have come any later. The blitzing metal grazed the side of his forehead as he turned downward. Mike dropped to the floor. Metal on metal screeches told him the mask, aka buzzsaw, was grinding into the chair. Fireflies of hot spark seared the little hairs on Mike's arms as he rolled away from the chair. All of Mike's muscles demanded a break. He flopped into a glob of exhaustion. The continuing spray of sparks, and his understanding of his foe's strength, got Mike back into motion. He tried to stand. Fiery pain in Mike's calf sent him careening off balance. He toppled backward into jabbing metal and sticky, crusty faux fur. Mike scuttled away from what was grabbing at him. His gaze shot around him wildly. He saw a litter of faded, matted fur-covered animatronic characters. It's just costumes, Mike told himself. Again, he tried to stand. This time, ready for the pain. He made it. But as he wavered on his feet, he heard a peculiar, familiar hop, hop beat of snaps. Looking down, he watched the costume's clamshell open. Mike squawked and blundered backward. His hand whipped to his nose and mouth as the thick stench of rotting corpses hit him. No longer thinking about running because his brain was now overwhelmed by what he was seeing and smelling, Mike's stomach threatened to heave as he gazed at the mutilated remains of 3 men. And Max. Mike gagged as he looked at poor Max's body. It was severed in 2. No, not severed. It looked like something had bit her in half at the waist. Her upper body lay back against one of the 2 men, and her lower body was draped across her stomach. Mike, his hand over his mouth, quickly shifted his gaze to her face. Her eyes and mouth were open wide and erect of pure terror. "Oh, Max," Mike whispered. Mike jerked his eyes away from her. When he did, he saw that the faces of one of the men had been similarly chewed, all the way into the man's brain. Mike quickly moved his gaze to the other two men. One was older and one younger. Mike sucked on his breath. He recognized the younger man. It was Jeff, Mike's brother. Jeff and the older guy looked like they'd been run through a meat slicer. But no, the cuts weren't straight. They were curved, like the wounds you'd get from a pirate's hook. The last thought finally galvanized Mike. He turned away from the putrefying cadavers, and he lit past the still-sparking mask and chair. He staggered toward the door. At the room's threshold, Mike paused. All the way up and down the main hallway, the lights were surging on and off, on and off. The rhythm wasn't even, though. It was chaotic, as if the lights were being manipulated by someone too enraged to stay in control. Mike squinted to see through the disorienting flashes of light and dark. It was hard to know for sure, but the hallway appeared to be empty. Mike reeled into the hall, his feet fumbling, as if he'd never properly learned to walk. Mike zigged and zagged his way toward the lobby. If he could get there, he could get out of the building. Out of the building meant salvation. Mike tried to pick up the pace. His feet shuffled faster. Just a few feet from the lobby now. From behind Mike, a crash boomed after him. A roar joined the crash. They partnered in their pursuit. Mike didn't bother to look back. He called on every ounce of strength he had, and he stepped on the gas. Managing to break into a jerky gallop, he spilled into the lobby. He threw himself toward the double doors. But when Mike hit the doors, they wouldn't open. They were locked. A new sound joined the crashing and roaring. No, not a sound. A voice. A singing voice. The lights were now going totally bonkers. They were winking in and out so fast that it was impossible for Mike to see what was coming toward him. But something was. Something big. Something fast. Mike summoned the last bit of his perseverance. He pounded on the heavy metal doors. Sensing rather than seeing that his time had run out, Mike looked to his left. He screamed and fell into a total eclipse of any light he'd ever seen or hoped to see. Abby curled up on her bed, hugged Dolph tighter than she ever had, and it still wasn't tight enough. Outside Abby's window, the sun was a deep red ball hovering just above the hill in the distance. Soon it would slip out of sight. Abby thought the ball looked like a big drop of blood, like the sky was hurt and needed a bandage. Of course, Abby knew the sky wasn't hurt. She was hurt. But she wasn't hurt in a way that a bandage could help. A bandage couldn't fix the stuffed-up nose and stinging eyes that hours of crying had left her with. And it couldn't fix the fact that the happiness she'd been feeling ever since she'd been united with her friends at Freddy's had been ripped away. Abby's happy was gone. That was why she kept hugging Dolph tighter and tighter and tighter. Hanging on to something familiar, something Abby loved, and who loved her, was the only thing that could stop her tears. Maybe, she hoped, it hadn't worked yet. A knock on the door caused Abby to smush Dolph even more. Abby put her face in Dolph's gray-blue fur.
"Abby, sweetheart."
Her Aunt Jane called through the door. Abby let go of Dolph with one arm, and she pulled the blanket up over herself and the dolphin. Even through the blanket and the door, she could hear the TV in the living room. She'd heard it for hours. The stupid fake laughter coming from the TV told Abby that her Aunt Jane was watching old-timey sitcoms.
"You can't stay in there forever, kiddo,"
Aunt Jane called.
"Leave me alone!"
Abby shouted. She sniffed again. Jane's exasperated sigh came clearly through the door.
"Sit yourself,"
she said. Abby could tell that her aunt was annoyed. But who cared? She listened in satisfaction as the tap-tap-tap of the dumb high heels her aunt always wore retreated from her door. Jane gave Abby's closed door a long, searing look. Spoiled brat. The obnoxious little twit wouldn't be acting like that much longer. Jane thought as she strode back into her nephew's ratty, pathetic living room. Ha! Living room. How could anyone live in such squalor? Jane sure couldn't. But she could tolerate it, for now. Jane had to keep her eye on the end goal. That was why she was here pretending to help. Oh, she was helping all right, helping herself. Once Abby was in Jane's custody, Jane would be one step closer to getting control of the big fat trust fund that should never have been Abby's in the first place. Why Jane's father had left his money to his granddaughter instead of his daughter was beyond Jane. She understood why he hadn't left it to Jane's brother. For one thing, he disappeared off the face of the earth after he left his family. For another, he was an idiot. He never should have married such a weak woman. Curling her lip at the couch's sagging cushions, Jane plopped onto one of them, wriggling to try to create a comfortable position. She reached for the TV remote and made yet another attempt to find something decent to watch on the ridiculously old television. Landing on yet another sitcom, Jane heard an odd whirring sound. Crappy TV. Must be feedback, she thought. She turned out the volume so she could hear what was being said instead of hearing the static. Jane smoothed the creases of her pants. I'm going to have to get this pantsuit dry cleaned, she thought. Who knew what kind of parasites were living in the grungy sofa cushions? A funny line on the TV pulled a laugh from Jane. She shook her head at the antics on the screen, and Jane stopped mid-headshake. What was that? She got a glimpse of movement in the kitchen. Was Mike finally home? Jane turned and opened her mouth, preparing the scolding her nephew deserved for expecting her to cool her jets in. Jane dropped the remote, half in shadow and half in the blood-red sphere of the desk light coming through the kitchen window. A giant bear stood next to Mike's fridge. It was just a few feet from Jane, and it was staring at her with radiant white eyes. Jane closed her eyes. I'm hallucinating, she thought. Just a little time in the dregs of Mike's life, and he was already losing her. Jane opened her eyes again. No way. The bear was still there, and it was taking a step toward her. Still under her blanket, still hugging Dolph, and crying even harder now. Abby went rigid when a big thud shook the house so hard that Abby's bed joggled beneath her. Abby shoved back the blanket and sat up.
What was that?
She whispered to Dolph. Dolph had no answer, but he was there for support when Abby got out of bed and hurried to her door. Laying her ear against the painted wood, she listened. She heard nothing, except the TV. Since Abby had burrowed under the covers, the red ball in the sky had disappeared. Now just a red sheen outlined the top of the hills. Abby could see in the distance through her window. Night would be here very soon.
Aunt Jane?
Abby called. Abby didn't really want Aunt Jane, but she didn't feel right about ignoring the Big Bang. The only response Abby got was more of that fakey fake laughter from the TV. Abby frowned. She looked back toward her bed. Maybe she should just get back in bed. Abby listened at the door again. No, she had to know what had made that big sound. Abby reached the doorknob, but then she hesitated. She backtracked to her desk so she could grab her drawing pad and some pencils. Abby always felt better when she had a pad and pencils in the pocket of her overalls, so she stuffed both into place. A bit more confident, Abby returned to her door and opened it. She peeked out into the hallway. Then, hesitantly, she walked down the hall toward the kitchen. It was empty, so Abby looked toward the living room, where
Freddy?
Abby's happy came back to her. The animatronic bear separated itself from a blobby shadow near the end of the sofa. As soon as it did, Abby could see she wasn't looking at Freddy. The bear looked like Freddy in every way, except for one obvious difference. His fur wasn't brown, it was golden. The gold was almost the color of the shirt Abby was still wearing, with the mood overalls she put on that morning. A golden Freddy!
Wow!
Abby said. She no longer cared about the miserable hours she'd just gone through. Her eyes still stinging. She could breathe through her nose again.
Who are...
Abby stopped mid-question when a little boy with tousled blonde hair, the same color as the big robotic bear's fur, magically came out of the robot.
Not Freddy,
the blonde boy said. Abby stared in awe at the little boy. He looked just like an ordinary boy, but not exactly. The boy was kind of sparkly, and Abby could see through him. Just a wee bit. Abby thought the boy looked the way an angel might look. Abby gave the fairy tale-like boy a big smile.
You came for me?
She asked. The boy nodded.
Everyone's waiting. It's time to go play.
Abby squealed and clapped her hands. The blonde boy gave her a smile and then dissolved into a shimmer that went back into Golden Freddy. The big bear gestured at Abby to follow him as he took a giant step toward the front door of the house. Abby looked down at Dolph. She didn't want to risk losing him when she was playing with the others, so she set the dolphin on the kitchen table. As she did, her gaze caught a glimpse of light blue in the living room. Abby turned. On the floor, jutting out from behind the end of the sofa, the hem of Aunt Jane's pants was visible. Her aunt's feet, still in her high heels, stuck out of the pants. Her heels seemed to be lying in the pool of something. Ketchup, maybe? How had her aunt spilled ketchup behind the sofa?
Silly Jane.
Golden Freddy said. The animatronic spoke in the little boy's voice.
She fell asleep.
Abby started to ask herself why her aunt would sleep on the floor and spilled ketchup. But then she shrugged. She didn't care what her aunt did. She turned and followed Golden Freddy out the door, closing it behind her. Golden Freddy trudged stiffly off a little porch. Abby paused as she listened to his heavy footsteps. All the sun's red was gone. It was full on night now. A third of the moon was hovering over the concrete-headed stream across the street, and the moon's light made the bear's fur seem like it was about to catch fire. It looked really cool. Abby gazed up and down the street.
How do we get to Freddy's?
She asked Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy clicked his head. One of his big wide eyes blinked shut and then opened again in a slow-motion wink. His teeth flashed in the moonlight as he gave Abby a wide smile. The smile was more creepy jack-o'-lantern than warm and friendly. But Golden Freddy couldn't help that. Abby knew that the animatronics couldn't move and make expressions like normal kids. That was okay. Abby had never ridden in a taxi before, so she felt a fizz of excitement when she opened the shiny yellow-black door and got into it. Taking a seat, she grinned at the fun old country music playing on the radio. She looked at the back of the driver's head. All Abby could see around the driver's headrest was curly brown hair sticking out from under a dirty baseball cap that looked like it had been worn for thousands and thousands of days. The hair and the cap were bobbing to the twangy music. Abby shifted her gaze to the rear-view mirror, and she saw crinkled green eyes looking back at her. The driver turned his head, and she noticed a toothpick sticking out between lips stretched into a friendly smile. The driver faced front again and asked, "Where to, little lady?" As Abby opened her mouth to answer the question, the other backseat door opened. The taxi settled low, really low, as Golden Freddy squeezed himself in through the door and managed to sit next to Abby. "What the hell?" The driver spun around in his seat, jerking so much that he hit his head on the roof of the taxi. He spit out his toothpick and let out a shriek. Abby smiled, but she didn't blame the driver for his reaction. She knew adults didn't understand. The driver's mouth hung open as he stared at Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy gave the driver one of his big grins. The driver turned around farther to look at Abby. She smiled at him sweetly. The driver shook his head, then faced the front of the taxi again. "Not cool, man," he said. "Not cool." Abby disagreed. She thought riding a taxi with Golden Freddy was very cool. Muttering something Abby couldn't make out, the driver took in a loud breath. Then he put the car in gear.
We want to go to the old Freddy's Pizzeria, please,
Abby said. The driver eyed Abby in his rearview mirror. He shook his head. "Why do I always get the weirdos?" he asked.